Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hello, good to be with you.
Well, thank you for joining us. We appreciate it. Now, opinion polls indicate that the new European Parliament will swing to the right, with Eurosceptic and nationalist parties making significant gains. Now, what impact on the EU policymaking and cohesion will this have?
Well, as we've seen in the film just now, there is, of course, the open question of how coalitions will be formed and how party families will come together. The key question at this point is whether the far right and the right populists, who may not be very far to the right, actually unite in one party group in parliament, or whether there will be two. And then, of course, the question is how the Christian Democrats, or EPP, European People's Party, how they decide to work with the far right. We have seen that the outgoing Commission President, who is also the lead candidate for the European People's Party, she said that on some issues she could imagine working with, in particular, the party of Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. However, there is no commitment as yet by the European People's Party to either not or to fully cooperate with them. So it will be interesting to see what happens next week. But in any case, whichever formation in the parliament we will see, we already see that the centrist parties, the conservatives throughout Europe, have adopted some of the positions that the far right has made very strong. For instance, on immigration, for instance, a little more skepticism on the Green New Deal. So even if we continue to have a coalition of pro-European parties in the European Parliament, meaning the Conservatives, the Social Democrats with the Liberals, and possibly the Greens, their positions may have moved without any far-right participation further to the right-hand side of the political spectrum.
So after the exit polls in the Netherlands, after the voting took place yesterday, all eyes seem to be on Germany's AfD. And according to some surveys, there is a prediction that they might actually send the second biggest representation to the European Parliament after the Christian Democrats. What do you think would be the consequences for Germany and for Europe if that was to take place?
Indeed, there are consequences on two levels, and let me start with Germany first. After the European elections, all eyes in Germany will be on regional elections in 3 regions in eastern Germany, where the far-right party AfD also polls very strongly at the moment, even coming first, depending on the polls, but with a clear tendency to be very strong in terms of results. Now, of course, the moderate parties are very concerned about this, and more attention as a consequence of the European elections will be paid to those regional elections. I think, whereas now there is, of course, a fierce debate in Germany whether this party is actually constitutional and compatible with the basic law in Germany, then the focus will more be on the political positions of the party. Imagine that it comes out strongest. I think scrutiny of the actual party platform of AfD will be very important. And just a point on that, AfD is the only party in Germany that suggests that Germany could possibly leave the European Union. This would be a move which would be detrimental to Germany's economy, which is highly dependent on the single market. So what I see happening right now, and there will be more of this in the future, is that those positions will actually be taken seriously, and the party will have to argue how it can imagine putting those into place, given the high costs that some of those positions, including on immigration, will have for Germany. Germany is a country that needs labor migration into Germany, and AfD clearly has created a very negative narrative on immigration, and there's a real fear among corporates, in particular in Eastern German regions where AfD polls strongly, that Germany will become very unattractive for migrant workers while we need them. And on the European level, of course, AfD would bring a Eurosceptical voice to the European Parliament. I believe that as soon as they sit in the Parliament, the idea that Germany should leave the EU will disappear, and we will discover that this was purely, kind of propaganda before the elections, because the losses for Germany will be very important. And also some of the positions that AfD has on weakening the European Union would run straight against the interest of Germany, which very strongly depends on close relationships with its neighbors, in economic terms, in security terms. So we are deeply anchored in the European Union, and any move to loosen that would come at a huge price for Germany.
At a huge price indeed. Now, how will the expected fragmentation of the European Parliament affect the governance of the EU? How big is there a risk of paralysis on key issues like Ukraine or maybe even the Green Deal?
Well, that really depends on how strong the far right turns out to be in the end. If there is still a majority of moderate parties, and I really believe that will be the case, although I also think the far right will win seats, there still is very likely going to be a large coalition possibility among moderate parties. And the European Parliament doesn't work in stable and fixed coalitions, but really depending on the subject matter, parties come together, and also individual MPs decide how they vote. There's a far lower discipline along party lines than you have in many national parliaments. So I think the political debate will be very intense, and MPs will continuously have to make up their minds where they stand, and there will be a lot of negotiation between the party groups where they tend to go. So I think this new parliament that comes together for the first time very soon after the elections, it will be a parliament where there's more political dispute. I do believe that the parties on the far right and possibly also on the far left will come out more strongly with clearer positions, and that there will be a very, very strong debate. But that doesn't make it impossible to pass laws, of course. But as I said earlier, it may well be that there's more criticism of the Green New Deal, which in my view would be a very bad thing to happen, although the implementation of the Green Deal can maybe be done in a better way. But we do need to fight climate change, and the European Union has taken a lead role, not only on the continent, but also worldwide. And that is so important, as we see every day with flooding and other developments, how far climate change already goes and how big the dangers are for humanity.
So the division and polarization when it comes to different sides of the political spectrums ahead of the final act of the EU parliamentary elections are very evident. How do you think that this could potentially affect the way in which, for example, EU's eastern flank is actually pushing through with their goals when it comes to defense and deterrence?
Right now, securing the eastern flank is a top priority for Europe because the war in Ukraine is, of course, the most destabilizing factor for us as Europeans, and with it, the cracks in Europe's security order. This is a NATO task which lies mostly on the shoulders of member states. Poland, of course, is one of the countries that has really changed its approach, with the defense budget now running up to 4% of GDP. Other countries are catching up. Germany is at 2% at the moment. So one of the big questions will be, where will national governments go in their readiness to invest more in defense and security? And how will NATO increase its efforts to strengthen the eastern flank? The European Union, for a while, will not be the crucial actor in terms of security and defense, because this is not an EU competence, and at the moment I see no readiness of governments to actually want to transfer this competence to the EU. However, it's very important that cooperation increases while countries will retain their sovereignty. And one of the areas which is currently very intensely discussed in Europe is the question whether there should be a defense commissioner. So one thing a defense commissioner could, for instance, do is improve European cooperation on procurement of armament, but also on industrial cooperation. So Europe moves more towards having its own defense industry, which is more Europeanized, really stronger, and that will help Europeans to make a better contribution to defense in NATO. Depending on who wins the US elections, European contributions to NATO will be all the more important, as it is a grievance of the United States, and has been for years, that Europe needs to take a bigger share in burden sharing. And I think we are now on track. People have realized in the European Union, given Russia's attack on Ukraine and on other countries in a hybrid way, how dangerous the situation is and how much we need to do ourselves to step up security.
Certainly. And finally, when we look at the European Union and its efforts to provide military or economic aid to Ukraine. There's one country in particular that stands in the way, and that's Hungary. Hungary also has its issues with rule of law, and it was the Belgian presidency that suggested perhaps instituting Article 7 against Hungary. Do you think that that's feasible? Is it the right thing to do? Hungary has the upcoming presidency just around the corner. How do we deal with Hungary when Europeans are so united and want to help Ukraine and, of course, eventually have Ukraine join the European Union?
Well, there are two important topics in your question. One is the question of geopolitical alignment. Can we actually afford to have an EU member on Russia, which is an aggressor, a warmonger on our continent against an independent sovereign country? Can we afford to have one EU member not fully backing the EU approach to sanctions and to support for Ukraine? I think that's a very crucial question because it goes really very much to the identity and also the values base of the European Union. And I expect that if there is a situation continuously where Hungary would block certain measures, that the EU member states will try and find ways, and in the past, in the way they have, to move ahead, even if Hungary decides individually to block certain measures. Secondly, in your question was the point of rule of law. This is one of the fundamental principles of the European Union, and Hungary has for a while violated these, and this has been documented in various surveys conducted by the European Commission and by others. So the question of using the tools that the EU has against a country that violates the principles that it signed when joining the European Union, that is an important question. And this question was also raised for Poland under the previous government. So right now, there is a lot of hope attached to the new government in Poland to actually come back to the European consensus and fulfill rule of law, which is constitutive for the single market, which is also very beneficial to Poland. But for the Hungarian case, we see no positive development. A result of that is that Hungary doesn't get all the money it could get as part of the Next Generation EU fund. This is a huge pot of money which was designed during COVID times to support green and digital transition in the European Union. And the money was conditioned on every single country fulfilling the rule of law principle. And Hungary has not been receiving all the money that was earmarked for it because of this violation. In my view, this is the more powerful tool than the Article 7 procedure, because right now, if there is one other country that blocks the vote against a country that doesn't respect the rule of law, then Article 7 cannot be implemented. This is different with the expenditure tools that the EU has, and I think the political pressure that emerges if a country doesn't get the financial support it could get if it would respect rule of law. I think that is the way to go. And in my personal view, I think that in the future, more money will be conditioned on respecting the rule of law, because it's very hard to explain in those countries that are staunch defenders of rule of law that money is spent for some who don't respect that principle anymore.
It's interesting how there is so much attention during this EU parliamentary election on the European troublemaker. Thank you so much for joining. Daniela Schwarzer joining us here in the studio today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.